Hello, very evening. My name is HAZIQ bin SAFAR. My Matric number is 305761. So today, I will explain about the overview of examine American foreign policy and the shift in American foreign policy on anti-corruption from the Biden administration to the current Trump administration. The main difference between the two administrations lies in how they view corruption and its role in international politics. Under President Biden, corruption was treated as a national security threat. The administration believed that the corruption weakens democracy, increases inequality, and allows authoritarian countries such as China and Russia to expand their influence. As a result, anti-corruption became a key part of US foreign policy. In 2021, Biden introduced National Security Study Memorandum 1, which officially identified corruption as a national security issue. The administration worked closely with international organizations such as the G7, OECD, and FATF to strengthen global anti-money laundering efforts and improve international cooperation. The Biden administration also increased the use of sanctions against corrupt officials through the Global Magnitsky Act and strongly enforced the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, or FCPA, to punish companies involved in bribery. In addition, anti-corruption reforms became an important condition for receiving US foreign aid. Overall, Biden's approach reflected liberal internationalism, where anti-corruption was seen as a part of a broader effort to promote democracy and strengthen the international rules-based order. However, when President Trump returned to office in January 2025, the approach changed significantly. The clearest example was in the executive directive issued in February 2025 that paused aggressive enforcement of the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act. The administration argued that strict anti-bribery regulation placed American companies at a disadvantage compared to competitors from countries such as China and Russia. The Trump administration also reduced its emphasis on international anti-corruption institutions and places less importance on anti-corruption conditions in foreign aid programs. Instead, it focused more on immediate US economic and strategic interests, including trade opportunities, security partnership, and resource access. This reflects a realist approach to a foreign policy, rather than treating corruption as a global threat that must be eliminated everywhere. In conclusion, the shift from Biden to Trump represents a change from a multilateral and values-based approach to a more pragmatic and interest-driven approach. Biden viewed anti-corruption as a tool for protecting democracy and global security, while Trump views it primarily through the lens of economic competitiveness and national advantage.
So from my part, I'll be analyzing Biden's anti-corruption foreign policy using neoclassical realism. Basically, this theory says that country makes foreign policy decisions based on both international pressures and their own national interests. So in Biden's case, corruption wasn't seen as just a governance problem. It was also viewed as something that could affect US security and influence. That's why this theory is suitable for explaining Biden's anti-corruption policy. So, one major change under Biden was how corruption was viewed. In 2021, the administration officially identified corruption as a national security threat. The idea was that corruption can weaken democratic institutions, harm economic growth, and create opportunity for foreign rivals. Because of this, anti-corruption became a bigger priority in US foreign policy. And another important aspect of the policy was competition with China and Russia. The Biden administration believed that corruption can make countries more vulnerable to foreign influence. So by promoting transparency and accountability, the US was also trying to stretch its partner and limit the influence of the rival power. From a neoclassical realism perspective, this showed that how anti-corruption was used to protect American interests. And a good example is, I can say, Ukraine, because the US supported anti-corruption reform to strengthen Ukraine institutions. After Russia invaded Ukraine, the US launched Task Force Collector Capture to target Russian elites and their assets. This showed that corruption measures were connected to broader strategic goals, not just governance reform. Overall, Biden's anti-corruption policy had two main purposes, which is first, it aimed to promote democracy, transparency and accountability. Second, it helps the United States strengthen its influence, support allies, and respond to geopolitical competition. So therefore, neoclassical realism helps us understand how anti-corruption policies serve both values and national interests. And why I choose neoclassical realism, because this theory explains both international and domestic factors behind foreign policy decisions. In this case, Biden's anti-corruption policy was influenced by security concerns, competition with China, Russia, and the goal of protecting US interests.
So now, I will discuss the policy implications of the Trump administration's anti-corruption approach on the United States itself. This policy shift creates both opportunities and risks for America. In the short terms, reduced enforcement of anti-corruption laws lowers compliance costs for American multinational companies. Instead of spending large amounts on investigations, audits and legal requirements, business can invest more in research, expansion and job creation. American firms may also become more competitive in emerging markets, particularly in sectors such as energy, mining, defense, and infrastructure. This could lead to increased revenues, more employment opportunities, and economic growth. The policy has also changed government priorities. Programs promoting transparency and anti-corruption abroad are receiving less attention, while diplomacy is becoming more focused on trade, investment, and protecting American business interests. However, there are important long-term risks. Weaker anti-corruption enforcement may make the US financial systems more vulnerable to illicit money flows. It could also weaken corporate ethical standards if bribery becomes more accepted in international business practices. In addition, the United States may face reputational costs. For many years, it has been viewed as a global leader in promoting transparency and the rule of law. Reducing its commitment to anti-corruption could weaken that image. Finally, even if enforcement is relaxed in the United States, American companies may still face strict anti-bribery regulations in other regions, especially in Europe. In conclusion, this policy provides short-term economic benefits and greater flexibility for business, but it also creates long-term risks to financial integrity, corporate ethics, and America's global reputation. The challenge is to find the right balance between economic competitiveness and strong governance. Thank you.
My name is NURSYUHAIDA ROSLAN. My nomenclature is 294152, and I'm going to be explaining about the complex policy implications of United States anti-corruption efforts, specifically on how the extraterritorial reach of the Foreign Corrupt Practice Act, or the FCPA, influence international relations. We will look at this through four key lenses, which is global standards, sovereignty, development, and commercial risks. First, let's discuss the role of the US as a catalyst for reform by aggressively enforcing the FCPA. The United States has effectively exported its anti-bribery standards. This hasn't just impacted US firms, it has pressured other nations to update and align their own domestic legislation. The ultimate goal here is to raise the bar for global compliance and create more equitable, transparent playing field for international commerce. However, this reach does not come without friction. The application of the FCPA to non-United States entities has created significant tension regarding national sovereignty. Because the US often assert jurisdiction based on what some consider minimal connections, like using the US banking system or listing on US exchanges, many international partners view this as an overreach. It is frequently seen as an infringement upon their own domestic regulatory autonomy. Beyond the legal arguments, there is a strategic development-oriented objective. They estimate corruption as a primary driver of government instability and economic stagnation. By promoting transparency and investing in the strengthening of foreign judiciaries, the US aims to help partner nations become more stable and democratic. The goal is simple: reduce the space where illicit actors and criminals can operate, thereby fostering a more secure global environment. And finally, we must address the cost of these policies. The United States used tools like visa restriction, targeted sanctions, and asset recovery to hold officials and entities accountable. While this grants the United States significant diplomatic leverage, it also creates a challenging reality for multinational firms. These companies are now forced to implement highly robust and often expensive compliance regimes just to maintain access to US markets and mitigate the risk of legal action. In summary, while US anti-corruption policy acts as a powerful engine for global reform and stability, it simultaneously creates complex challenges regarding sovereignty and operational costs for international firms. Understanding this balance is critical to navigate the current landscape of international relations.
In this section, we will present the policy recommendation for the incoming Trump administration. Moving beyond the immediate 180 days regulatory pause initiated in February 25 by Executive Order 14209, we argue that a complete policy vacuum poses severe long-term risks. Instead, our recommendations propose a paradigm shift. We will transition United States foreign policy away from moralistic liberal internationalism to the era and anchor it firmly within narrowism and public choice theories. Our objective is straightforward. We want to transform anti-corruption frameworks from a competitive economic handicap into a targeted instrument of American commercial statecraft. So for our first key policy recommendation addresses a asymmetric geopolitical targeting. Under public choice principle, universal enforcement of the FCPA places a disproportionate, costly auditing burden on domestic firms, essentially handicapping them in critical development markets. We advise that the DOJ and SEC deprioritize standard supply side investigation in contested sectors such as telecom, energy, and aerospace. Instead, we pivot the demand side of corruption by aggressively enforcing the Foreign Extortion Prevention Act (FEPA) and deploying targeted global Magnitsky sanctions. We can prosecute corrupt foreign kleptocrats directly. These could cut off the Chinese and Russian state-owned enterprises who rely on bribes to win tenders, creating a secure, legal playing field specifically for American market expansion. For our second recommendation, we're focusing on building supply chains resilience through the strategic industry safe harbors. Currently, fear of aggressive public DOJ enforcement prevent United States firms from competing dynamically in highways resource-rich regions. We would like to propose to establish a confidential fast-track clearing system co-managed by the Departments of Commerce and Treasury. This safe harbor will grant total criminal immunity for routine facilitation payments within critical national security verticals such as semiconductor manufacturing, rare earth, element mining, and defense in aerospace by handling compliance issue through confidential civil and administrative review rather than disruptive criminal prosecutions. We would like to protect United States commercial interests and ensure continuous access to vital global resources. Finally, we must address the geopolitical vacuum left by the United States regulatory de-escalation. Traditional European allies are attempting to fill this space by expanding their own extraterritorial reach. Laws such as France Spain 2, Germany's Supply Chain Act, and upcoming EU directive are actively being used to police global transactions, exposing United States multinationals to heavy foreign penalties. We recommend that the President take a hard sovereign defensive stance. The United States Trade Representative should classify foreign extraterritorial actions against American companies as unfair trade barriers. The State Department must clearly communicate that any attempt by European regulators to bypass sovereign state jurisdiction will face immediate proportional tariff-based countermeasures. And to summarize our strategy evaluation, we would like to look at this comparative policy metric, because on this fundamental divergence between the Biden era framework and our proposed Trump 2 blueprint is theoretical. The previous administration approached anti-corruption through liberal internationalism, prioritizing global standards and multilateral alignment under bodies like the FATF. Our recommended model adopts a neuralist perspective. Unilateral overreaching regulations simply drag down United States relative economic power by exhibiting asymmetric targeting, establishing secure safe harbors, and defending sovereign trade boundaries. The administration can convert anti-corruption policy into a powerful force multiplier for absolute American global dominance. Thank you.